Everybody. We so appreciate your being here for our Strategies for Action Lunch and Learn series. My name is Lisa Bachman, and I am the Assistant Director at the Holocaust Memorial Resource and Education Center of Florida. We welcome back those of you who have been regularly tuning in with us to this series. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, please know that we are located just north of downtown Orlando. And we do hope that when we are able to open our doors again, that you'll be able to come and visit us in person. Our mission is to use the history and lessons of the Holocaust to build a just and caring community, free of anti-Semitism and all forms of prejudice and bigotry. These Lunch and Learn sessions are designed to answer that question that you posed: what can I do to learn and impact change around racism? And today we're going to do just that with a program that is examining racial inequity. It was really eye-opening to me a few years ago when I learned the difference between the words equity and equality, and I hope that all of you will have that same experience today. Before I introduce our speakers, I do want to thank all the people who have generously made donations to support this free programming. Right now, through September 15th, our friends at United Arts are running a campaign where they're matching donations by adding on an additional 15%. If you are able to make a gift today, we would love for you to text the letters SFA to 91999. Thank you so much for your consideration. So now I am honored to kick off this program. I'm going to introduce our moderator, Secily Wilson, who will then introduce our speakers. Secily is a former broadcast journalist and now owns the title best-selling author. Her new book, She Said the P Word, debuted last week as the #1 new release, and we'll send you a link to her book as well. Among her many accomplishments, Secily founded the WOW Legacy Group, which is a growing nonprofit here in Central Florida with a mission to empower, educate, encourage, and inspire women facing life's adversity. She's a trailblazer, as is our other speakers today, who are real advocates for racial equality. I am now proud to turn this program over to Secily.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa. And hello, everyone. I'm so glad that you guys were all here to take part in this conversation. And I want to get it started because 40 minutes goes really, really quickly. So I want to introduce our panelists right now. Let's get right to it. First up, Cecile Schoon. Like, oftentimes I'm called Cecile, but this one is the real Cecile. So Cecile went to, as a graduate of Harvard University. But she went to college, she realized her own parents were relegated to sitting at the back of the bus. It drove her decision to become a civil rights attorney and social activist. The inability to see or to diminish the accomplishments of Black coworkers is something she has heard of far too many times, and she takes depositions in her employment discrimination cases involving race and gender. As I mentioned, she's a Harvard graduate, University of Virginia School of Law graduate, and spent 5 years as an active duty Air Force JAG and retired from the Air Force. I'm an Air Force brat as well, reserve as a major. She's currently a civil rights lawyer in Panama City. She also is the chair of the State of League efforts of the restoration of voting rights for persons with felony convictions who have completed their sentences. Cecile is also a proud member of the Chi Omicron Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. She's the mother of 3 and enjoys watching soccer with her best friend, husband, law partner, Alvin Peters. Chris King. Chris realized the inequity in education system, and he founded the Elevation Scholars Program with a focus on educational inequality in the United States, primarily here in Central Florida. The goal is to prepare high-achieving students from low-income families for acceptance into the nation's most selective colleges and universities, and to walk with them through college graduation. Chris King is the founder and chief executive officer of Elevation Financial Group. Under his leadership, Elevation has developed a consortium of companies specializing in real estate, investment, property management, and property renovation. Chris is also a Harvard graduate and received his law degree from the University of Florida. He was the 2018 gubernatorial candidate for the state of Florida and also selected as the Democratic nominee for lieutenant governor of Florida and one of the nation's closest and most watched midterm elections. Chris has been widely recognized as one of the state's leading voices for affordable housing and housing security. He's married to his best friend, his high school sweetheart, and they have 3 children, Charlie, Mary Grace, and Luke. Thank you and welcome to both of you to our panel discussion. I'm so glad to get this party started. But before we do that, I want you all and everyone in the chat room to take a quick look at this video. And I want you to take note and how it resonates with you, what stands out. And when we come back, we'll talk about it. So let's take a look.
Hey, line up. Line up. Everybody line up. We're about to race. Everybody line up. Shoulder to shoulder. Take off your backpack. Basketball. Line up. We're about to race. Hey, we are racing for a $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this. A $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm going to make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability, you don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I have said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this was a fair race and everybody was back on that line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes would smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this big of a head start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the lead that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go! If you didn't learn anything from this activity, you're a fool.
Wow. That's a very real example of equity, equality. I want to go right to you, Chris.
Line up, everybody line up.
I want to go right to you, Chris, and because it kind of relates to your work with Elevation Scholars. How did this video land on you?
Well, thank you, Cecily. It's an honor to be with the Holocaust Center and to be beside you and Cecile, who's a friend and who has done extraordinary work with the League of Women Voters, and particularly around Amendment 4, that wraps itself around all of these issues. That video, I think, is illustrative of really the discussions that this country is having, all over right now, because there are people who watch that video and they get it. They see the inequity and they get it, and it's not hard to get. They can see it, they can feel it, and they want to do something about it. There are others who will watch that video and not get it, not understand it, and will excuse it or rationalize it or suggest that it just doesn't exist. But in my view and in my worldview and in what I have learned in these first 41 years of life, is that the world presents very different opportunities depending on the color of your skin and where you grew up. And until we recognize that and realize it, nothing's going to change. And particularly, and I would say, and I think I've gotten more frank on these things as I've gotten a little older and I've been through some experiences, is where often,
t-shirt.
That's right. And I've had some great teachers. We often are not, we don't hear often a lot of voices that look like me who are able and willing to talk about things like privilege, white privilege, or white fragility. Maybe we'll get into some of these things, or what it looks like. Where folks that look like me recognize, there was a race in Texas years ago where there was a candidate, and they said about the candidate, he thinks he's so wonderful, but he was born on third base. He was born with a silver foot in his mouth, but he doesn't seem to recognize it. The challenge for any of us, and particularly for someone like me, is to see the advantages that I have received and to be responsible with those, yes, and use that power and privilege to build a better society.
And you're doing that with your work with Elevation Scholars. But before you answer more on that, because I want to get more into that education piece of that, I want to speak with Cecile, because you, as a Harvard graduate, did you have that same advantage that we just saw on this video?
I had some advantages, and the biggest advantage that I had was two parents that worked very hard to tell me that the world was my oyster. And that was contributed to, and I grew up in the Caribbean. My father is an immigrant and married my mom from Virginia, but I grew up in the Caribbean and came back to the States at 15. And when you're in an island environment where my father was from and well known, people of color, all ranges of color, were the people that were in the government that owned the shops. And white people were tourists. They kind of came and they left, and we were nice to them, and they weren't very important to us. So I actually had a very opposite experience that many African Americans have. And coming back to the States, I had a rude awakening in my freshman year in college. And my African American history professor was talking about people sitting at the back of the bus. Because in the Caribbean, I was learning West Indian history, European history, more than American history. So I knew a lot of things that happened, but I didn't have timelines. And I thought to myself, I'm so glad my parents never had to endure this indignity. And literally counting backwards, sitting in class at 19, because my parents had never spoken to me of any of these things that they had experienced.
So did it get real for you when you were sitting in the classroom at Harvard University?
I literally learned sitting in the classroom, and my eyes just bugged out and my head blew up. And shortly from that very painful and a blowing my mind experience, I kind of got the message from the race, the movie with the race. It kind of hit in a very hard way that I had all these benefits and that I was walking around with this ability to believe in myself because I hadn't been through the experiences so many African Americans have had from day one. They're told they're less, they experience less. It's just compiled. And at that point I said, I need to contribute my energy to try to equalize the situation. So that was my comeuppance.
Yeah, and those of you who are watching, I really want you to provide your questions or feedback in the chat room. We are monitoring it right now. I have a comment from Howard Moon, and I'd like to read that, and then I'm going to come back to you, Chris. He said, I participated in something very similar when I was in my 40s in a workshop for Catholic deacon candidates. As a Native American who grew up poor, I was so very surprised how far behind I was left, even though I was an upper middle class professional at the time. Does that sound normal to you, Chris? And is that common?
Well, some of our work that we have so enjoyed over the last few years is about 7-8 years ago, we started something called the Elevation Scholars Program that you referenced, which really tries to address the very issue that gentleman was raising, which is essentially, we believe, and a lot of people believe, talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. And so we began, it started in a sort of almost an accidental fashion. One morning I read around Thanksgiving in 2013, I read in the Orlando Sentinel a story about a young man at a local high school, a Title I high school, who was exceptional, absolutely exceptional, but was had a spirit of service, but was dealing with some pretty difficult personal circumstances, experiences I had no experience with. And we began working with him. That led to a program. Years later, every fall, we send now classes of students to some of the nation's top universities. But what we found in that is that these students, while exceptional, have to endure adversities that most people can only begin to imagine. This fall we'll send 27 scholars to colleges ranging from Harvard and Duke and Stanford, University of Florida, HBCUs, but many of those students, some of which live in hotels, hotels in the tourist corridor. Most of which, first generation to go to college. They don't know anyone in their family who's been to college. Many are immigrants. Some are undocumented. And imagining the challenges if you're undocumented or DACA of trying to get into college. And so there are tremendous inequities. Anybody can apply to Harvard or Duke, but it's silly for anyone to think that even these students with great talent are going to get in if they're not given the same bridges of opportunity that the kids across town applying from Winter Park or Trinity or Lake Highland are given.
And I will make this a personal statement here, because as a mother, my youngest daughter is now in her third year, entering her third year at Howard University, and my niece is entering her third year at Brown University. So the two of them at very prestigious universities and colleges, but it was difficult. My sister, as a single parent, raising her daughter, but my niece had to literally kick her butt to make sure that she studied and worked extra hard to make and earn her way into Brown. The same with my daughter, earn her way into Howard University. But even with that, we know that there are times that even though we work very hard, they may not have had that opportunity to get into those universities. So I want to switch gears for just a moment. And again, those of you who are watching, make sure you add your comments into the chat room. We want to hear from you. We want you in a part of this conversation. But there are so many inequities across the board, not just in education. We know that research says that Blacks are turned down more for home loans. And Chris, you're very, very aware of that, as well as Cecile, and that women are paid less. So there are inequities across the board. How do we handle that? And do you see that getting any better? Cecile, I'll go with you. Answer that.
Okay. There have been a lot of improvements and a lot of opportunities, and it can be a little misleading because people can think, oh, things are so much better. But there's still a big underlayer of different expectations and different opportunities provided to people in the employment arena, which is where I specialize, based on what you look like. I can't tell you how many cases I have had. I'm like, it's the same case. It keeps coming back. I want to bop it and it pops back up. But banking is unfortunately where I live in North Florida.
But
We
you
have
know,
situations.
let me interrupt you, Cecile.
Sure.
You say that it's a case that keeps popping up. Why? Even at this time, why do you feel like it keeps popping up?
I'll tell you, this is what people say. The person who is doing the improper thing and blocking someone's opportunity, they literally say these words, and I've had 10 of them say it, different people. I never saw Miss Smith in that position. The person is doing the work. The numbers are great for the bank, the office, because it often is a situation where there's a head teller and she'll be the acting manager for the bank for a year or so. And because she knows everybody, she knows their kids, the numbers go up, the customers come in, the deposits increase. They're at the top of the chart because they track all these things. And yet, and still, the person who makes the decision will literally say, I never saw Miss Smith in that role. And then they'll hire a very young male who might have played football, and she'll be responsible for training him, even though they both applied head to head. And that's what it comes down to. It's that mental expectation, kind of what Chris was talking about. People see, but they don't see. I mean, they appreciate the hard work, but I just never saw her in that role. And so those people are often not people who hate other people. They think that they're nice people and they would invite them into their home. They just put limitations on people because of what they look like, and they're often not even aware of it. I mean, I can tell you that's a common case.
Chris, you work very closely with fair housing. You see this all the time. What are you doing as an ally to help the unheard?
Well, I would suggest to what Cecile's point is, how do we change it? I kind of call it the power of validation. It's not going to change until folks who are CEOs or pastors of churches or leaders of states or cities you really have to run countercultural. You have to swim upstream. I'm a CEO of a business, and I can tell you every year, to Cecile's point, there are 9 young white men for every position coming at me that's available, as opposed to more diverse candidates. And it requires a real passion and because they're there, but there are not always the same pathways to connect that those folks have. And so what I've found, this is not a political, but a sort of a personal story, but it was in my life, and it sort of personifies what I think is really the power of validation. When you mentioned that I was the lieutenant governor nominee, on the day that Andrew Gillum, who happened to be my running mate and the person who made that decision, on the day he kind of explained to me why he chose me, he said something that sort of was an aha experience for me, and I think is the point we're both trying to make, is he said, if I had to explain to you, Chris, why you weren't as successful in the primary, what I would say is you needed somebody to validate you. You needed somebody to say you were the real deal. You needed somebody to come in and give you the opportunity to do what you wanted to do. In essence, he gave me that opportunity. But it's really what we do in the scholars program. It's what we do in our business. On the day that we identified, like we rolled out 18 new scholars, the day before we did that, it was very hard. It would have been hard for those scholars to walk into a business or a bank in downtown Orlando and speak to their CEO. It would have been hard for them to walk into our office. It would have been hard for them to apply to some of the colleges that we are helping them apply to. The day after, they were validated. They were recognized. Their stories were told in a powerful way. All of a sudden, the opportunities available to them changed because other people on the outside said, oh my goodness, are we missing something? That person is really exceptional. Oh my goodness, look at what she's overcome. And I think that's the burden of responsibility, regardless of the color of skin or what you do or where you live. If you have the opportunity to validate others, do it, because it can make all the difference.
It's that implicit bias that needs to be addressed on all levels. We need to make sure that we're addressing that. And especially in the business world, even those scholars who are moving now into the business world, opportunities. And I often say that a crisis creates opportunities, but I often say that we have a lack of opportunities just because of the color of our skin. That is that, and you mentioned this earlier, white privilege. Some people don't even think that that even exists. As a white male who has privilege, do you believe that exists, or is that just some fathom that we've made up?
Well, I don't just believe it exists. It exists. It's a truth. It's a reality. There is an enormous amount of data that I could debate with somebody who doesn't. I mean, if you look at, for instance, Black home ownership, if you look at Black business ownership, if you look at Black net worth, when we talk about communities of color versus white communities, the differences are stark. You know, but if you personalize it, just even in my own life, you know, what I think over the last 6 months, all of us are looking at these issues in perhaps we're looking internally, hopefully. We're trying to not just point outwards, look at what so-and-so's not doing right and what I'm doing, but looking at my own self. And if you look at my story, you know, I certainly, going back to that video, I was raised in a loving family in an affluent neighborhood with 2 parents. I didn't have any of those things they suggested those kids had against them. So all of my focus from the earliest years was on achieving and building up those skills or gifts that the world honors and rewards, because I didn't have to take a 2nd or 3rd job after school to keep the lights on at my apartment or worry about eviction. And so then that gave me the sense, well, certainly I should be able to apply to some of the nation's best schools. And then when I was graduated, certainly I could start a company. Why couldn't I? You know, this sense of the world, as you said, Cecile, is your oyster. And I think our challenge is to make more people feel that that's actually possible, but then actually make it possible.
Yeah, I love that. And going back to you, Cecile, on that, I'm sure that your family is not, you know, a rarity that you're speaking, oh, the world is your oyster to your children. I would hope that, well, I know that I did for my children. I told them that there is nothing that they cannot do. They can achieve any and everything that they want to do. But oftentimes that's not the case for some families. But before you answer that, before you comment on that, Chris, is there a record institution, lending institution that has a higher probability of lending to minorities than another? Do you know of one that you can say, okay, you can go here and guarantee that you can get it? Well, I know that nothing is guaranteed, but.
Sure. Well, Cecile is probably much more of an expert than I on this. In my experience, often credit unions or minority-owned lending institutions are better. There have not been a lot of great banks when it comes to these things. I mean, case in point, recently, you know, it's been a national story, the Paycheck Protection Program, these loans that were given when the nation was really struggling here in the last few months. And I predict, and we're already seeing evidence, that the organizations who received those loans were not often small and minority owned and women businesses. They were big corporations that were best prepared for this kind of a crisis, that had access to big banks and banking relationships. And many of them needed it to survive, but many of them took advantage of the system, and I think time will hold them accountable. But that's the difference in equity. I mean, that's a clear difference, and we've just lived through it.
Equity, Cecile, this is something that I am thinking that is really important right now in the stage of the game of the election. Those individuals who lost their voting rights for minor offenses now, with your help, are having the ability to vote again. Talk to us about that and how fair or unfair some may believe this is.
Oh, that's such a powerful topic. Well, it's much of the same. Many people will end up making mistakes and getting felonies. They have come from very limited backgrounds and I've gone to forums where they've said that these are things people have said to me out of their mouths. Well, mama needed help. I thought I could make a fast buck by helping this person that it was illegal. But this person had a big car. You know, they had a lot of music. They had a lot of girls, a lot of chains, whatever. They had status in the community, and somebody in the family was trying to help. And there was no jobs nearby. They would have babysat. They would have done other things. They weren't available. So they kind of get sucked in.
Inequality.
They get sucked in to try to make up that difference, and they don't compete in school. They don't finish school. It has a real impact. And so you find people who've had those experiences, they learn. They're in prison, they have a felony, and they get to their senses, and they're like, wow, I want to participate in our citizenship. I want to have a voice, and they start raising their children. And so the opportunity with Amendment 4 that Florida, our citizens voted for overwhelmingly, to allow them the right to vote again once they complete their sentence is such a great opportunity, and is a door that was opened wide. Unfortunately, the legislator came back and shut the door pretty close, and they said they defined completion of sentence to be payment of all fines, fees, costs, and so on. But guess what? As Chris said, you're already looking at a financial difference. Many of the financial inequities that people experience is Black people were not allowed to get loans for businesses. They were not allowed to buy homes. The banks shut them out. They were redlining. So a lot of the economic ability for people to even pay the fines and fees, that difference was actually created by the government. So it's outrageous to me that the government would turn around and say, we're going to put this line out here. We're going to treat everybody the same. Meanwhile, from the example of the race, the government had depressed the ability of Blacks and minorities and women and a lot of other groups to even get the economic ability to pay the fine. So it's a bit of a concern, but it's a great joy that the League of Women Voters of Florida and many, many other groups, NAACP, ACLU, Florida Rights Restoration Coalition with Desmond Meade himself, a person with a felony conviction, has done this work, and we're still working, and it's on appeal. We won a case, and the case is up on appeal. The oral argument was just this week, so we should get an answer soon.
So let's shift gears for just a moment. It's amazing to me that here we are in 2020, and it takes the murder of Floyd to bring attention and shine the spotlight on inequality, of fairness, of humanity. And we're having this conversation, but we've been here before. We've had these names before. We've had these cases before. The only thing that's different are the names. So what do you see, Chris? Do you see that there's hope? Do you see that something as a result of what just happened with the murder of Floyd is going to change?
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, we've had these stories over and over again. 2 years ago, we're speaking to mainly a Central Florida audience, but 2 years ago in 2018, we had a story here in Florida that really personally arrested me. It was the murder of Marquise McLaughlin, who was a young man, a part of a very famous national stand your ground case in Clearwater, Florida. And I spoke often and got to know that family quite well. So it was almost like a personal experience for me. You know, I'll never know George Floyd's family, gotten a little to know Trayvon Martin's, but a lot of these families. But I got to know this one, and I walked through this story. And, you know, what I said in some remarks to a big church service there, you know, and I would say this is the thing we most need, particularly from the white community, particularly from the white Christian community. We often get it from the Jewish community. We're on the Holocaust Center. We often hear it there. We often hear it in synagogues. We hear it in the Black church. We're often not hearing it in the white community. And what I said to that church body that day with Al Sharpton and Benjamin Crump and a bunch of others is I said, my belief that if you inserted Chris King in this story, if Chris King had been Marquise McLaughlin and the same fact pattern occurred to me, justice in Florida would have looked very, very different. And the amount of people interested in what happened to him at that point, the sheriff had not prosecuted the man who had murdered him. We got that changed. But justice would have looked different. And so that's at the end of the day, this is a heart issue. We can change these laws. Amendment 4, one day, God willing, we'll get there. Stand your ground will go away. I believe it's a completely unjust policy. But ultimately, the harder thing is to change hearts. And the challenge is trying to imagine yourself in someone else's shoes. And that's the thing this country is still struggling with.
But why is it so hard? I mean, it seems like it's like A plus B equals C, but you're listening. People are listening. They're like, oh, this is really bad. That's so sad. But they're not doing anything. Why? I had a very, I was so emotional when I read that and I saw that. And I posted a video on my Facebook page and I was so wrought with emotion because I'm thinking, wait, I mean, this man, you see him dying, the breath slowly falling from his body, and you do nothing. You're just standing there and no one does anything. And I'm like, we bleed the same, we see the same, we breathe the same. Why are we still doing this? Why? And I don't understand why we can't have that conversation and people are not stepping up, as you said, Chris. They're not stepping up and saying something and using their privilege to help and use their voice. Talk to me.
I think it's a hard issue. I think often people see when they do that they're going to lose something. That when they do that, they give up something. Somebody else is gain, a zero-sum game. Someone else is going to gain and I lose. I think our challenge, and I do think we're at an inflection point. I've been interviewing leaders across the state of Florida, many of which are people of color, most of which have been women. And one woman said the other day, a powerful thing that we've been speaking, that Black women on these issues have really been the conscience of America. I could give you a bunch of different examples, but I've been sort of teasing that out with the different audiences I've been talking about, because what we need is a new ethic in our body politique that really is more socially conscious of the other, the brother's keeper, somebody else's needs. Often, Black women have borne that responsibility. Right? Cecile will tell you in Amendment 4, it was Black churches that signed so many of those petitions that got that on the ballot, and in championing that issue. I wish my white church had done the same. It didn't. And so our challenge is to share that kind of interest and empathy and compassion, for others. That's what changes things.
Cecile, do you feel that same way? I mean, is it the Black woman that's going to make that difference?
The Black women have borne the brunt. I mean, W. Du Bois said, living life through a veil. Black people in general and minorities in general speak two languages. We know the reality that we experience, and we know how to, code shift when we're talking to white people in the white world. white people don't have that responsibility. And all the time when I'm in organizations, even I'm 61, you're 41, Chris, but I see white people treading on the toes of Black people constantly, and they're completely unaware of it, but they don't know the language. They don't know our cultural norms, and they'll call you by your first name, which is not acceptable. I did not give you permission to call me by my first name, but they think they're being friendly. It's like, no, you're insulting me. There's a whole lot of things that occur, but I wanted to say that, gosh, there are so many good points. I feel like the death of Mr. Floyd has been like a mind-blowing experience for many whites. And I've heard conversation, I've seen it on Facebook, on television, where there was a guy who said, rednecks for Black Lives Matter. And he said, a month prior to the death of Mr. Floyd, he never could have understood. But now he's starting, that event was so atrocious and so lacking in merit and so dehumanizing and so blatant, it actually kind of cracked through people's consciousness. And I think because of the multiplication of so many names, I think there is a new understanding in young people in particular and other people to change.
Are we numb to all that? Is that, do you think?
I think people's numbness is starting to go away with that horrific. That is my impression. And maybe I'm just an optimist. I still think there's tremendous work to do, but I hear organizations saying, and Chris, you and I we're the same alums, but I see a lot of Harvard things. They're saying we have got to invest in the Black community. Businesses saying we've got to take that second look. And I want to comment here. What happens to a lot of good Black applicants is they get those negative treatments where they work hard and get no benefit, where they work hard and get no reward. They don't get promoted. They don't get to go and hang out with the big boss when the big boss comes. This is what happens. And so people like yourself, Chris, you don't get access to them. They're down on the blow, working their butts off, being totally loyal, hardworking, all of that. But there's this barrier that other people put on them because I don't see that person in that role, or maybe their hair is too wild. Why, I had natural hair like 15 years ago. People are like, what is this woman doing? She's so pretty. Would she fix her hair? I literally would get that comment from white and Black.
I want to talk to you briefly about that, because we have the Crown movement that's going on right now. To that point, my daughter attended Montverde Academy, and her senior year was reprimanded from the school from violating dress code policy. Now, they wear uniforms. So what was the violation? The violation was her natural hair. And I could not understand that was an issue for my daughter, who is an AB student, who's an athlete, who is not a problem at all, but you attack her for her hair. Now, clearly they didn't know her mama was a journalist, and so it went viral. Because I'm like, that's not gonna happen. But the fact of the matter is, that's just one of many children. When we talk about inequality, come on, you're talking about the hair that grows out of a child's head. Right. What does that matter? So I'm glad that you brought that up. I want to kind of go back to the chat room for just a moment and read some of the comments here. We had one, the battles we fought in the 60s and 70s, young people back then, students back then, became involved, but there were no real follow through. The problems went below the radar at that time. I feel like sometimes even now we're talking about everything that's happening with Black Lives Matter. It's like, okay, let it chatter right now. But once the chatter quiets, then it goes back to normal. Do you believe that's going to happen the same way? Chris, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that's the concern, particularly in a lot of communities of color, that there's often a lot of noise after these incidents, after these murders, after these tragedies, and then nothing changes. And so I think the challenge is, and I'll say this in the most nonpartisan way I can say it, is that good people of all faiths, good people of all political persuasions are willing to embrace some of the big ideas that move the dial forward for all people. So take what Cecile has dedicated so much of her life to, Amendment 4. Let's be clear, Amendment 4 is arguably one of the greatest civil rights victories in the last 30 years in Florida.
150 years.
150 years. There you have it. That tells you what the challenges we've had here in Florida, and it should be embraced by all of us. This is not hard. This is easy. And Desmond Meade is a dear friend, and when this passed, and I like to think we were championing it everywhere we went. We all had great hope. But can you imagine if folks of all political persuasions spoke up? The litigation and the shenanigans that are holding it up would end. They would end. And it's the same thing with the affordable housing crisis, or the fact that 3 million people in Florida, many of them in communities of color, don't have health care when they could under federal policy. If we don't make any changes on the big ideas, nothing's going to change on the ground.
Yeah. And change is what we're saying. Someone said earlier, look, we have to make sure that things do not go back as normal. We have to make that change. I want to know from each of you, we have a few minutes left, but I want to know from each of you, Chris, when was a moment you got it wrong? I'm not talking about what you've done getting it right, but when you realized, oh, wow, I got this wrong. Tell me about a moment of that. Lisa, I'll ask you the same question.
It's funny. It's funny you say that. There was one. It was a little bit of a public moment, and it didn't get covered, but it was something that it led to. I remember being in a debate in the primary at the Florida Democratic Black Caucus, and I was working very hard against a very accomplished a Black candidate to gain as much support from them as I could. And I had a lot of friends there pushing for me. And I remember during that debate, they gave me an opportunity. Andrew and I already at that point had become quite close and kind of cared for each other, respected each other. And I remember I was given an opportunity to give him a compliment. And I don't exactly remember what I said, but I think I focused more on the way he communicated with his audience than his character, his ability to cast vision, his ability to connect with people's hearts. And then he said something a little bit snappy, and then he and I, over the next 24 hours, had
maybe you said, oh, he's so articulate.
Well, I don't think I was that naive.
Because we've heard this many times before.
Oh, we sure have. But I think I focused on that. And I think that was the joy for me as a white guy, white candidate who was then advocating for and lifting up and defending and taking bullets for a Black candidate, is I just developed such a maturity in how to be his best advocate and how to be aware of where the incoming was coming in. And it was an experience that I think endeared me to an audience, and I came to love in a way I would have never otherwise been able to experience.
Cecile, when did you get it wrong?
I've gotten it wrong many times in my life, and I see many of my peers waking up that they've gotten things wrong. And what I got wrong is I did not fully understand, and it's been growing over the years, all of the opportunities that I've had and people coming to me from the Black community, from the white community, as if I was the leader. But because I was raised with individualism, which is a very big part of American values, and because in a sense of false humbleness, I would say, oh, well, I can't speak for them. I don't know. And because the work I do is individual cases, I sue the Air Force, I sue Walmart, UPS, when they mistreat my people, yeah, you're going to hear from Mama Schoon. So I've done everything on an individual basis. And just in the last 5 years, I've understood that I've been shirking my responsibility to take on that role. If people are looking for me to have a bigger role and to speak for my people or be a part of the NAACP, I've just gotten a lot more community oriented locally. And I just like, the doors are open. And I don't know why it took me so long to realize that that was a hunger in my community and a need and something that people were coming to me on both sides. And I'd be like, who are they talking to? You know, I would not even see myself in that role. And I regret many opportunities and lost opportunities where I could have participated and been a voice at the table in a more constructive way, in a more open way. And it's just my journey. I understood that I needed to work individually, but up until the last 5 or 6 years, I did not fully understand. And I'm still learning that I need to take on the role and responsibility if people are coming to me, and I need to take that role and just run with it, because I am the product of Black and white people risking their lives for opportunities. I am the product of all of that. And so I need to openly and publicly address it and accept it. And I think many people of color who have had opportunities, like going to the top schools, my age, I think we've suffered some of the same kind of temporary and forgetfulness of, or not even knowing our role. And I have this conversation with others. We're like, whoa, we can get there out there with the Black voters matter, the young kids. It's not too late for us to help, but we just haven't seen ourselves in that role. Look at our Black leaders. They're in their late 70s and 80s. Where's the 60-year-olds? There's not a whole lot of us. And so it's unfortunate, but that's something that I think has happened to my class of people. And part of it, frankly, is going to majority white schools. That was not reinforced. If I had gone to Howard or Hampton that my parents had gone, I think I would have had a different pathway. And so we just need to talk about what gets lost when you go into a majority environment and you don't have the community that you would have had if you'd stayed in a HBCU. And I see that there's a trade-off there, but we can address it once we acknowledge it.
So that leads me to the point. We have a few minutes left, and I want both of you to very succinctly give us 3 things that we can leave our viewers who are watching, who are tuned in, what they can do to make a difference. 3 things so that we don't go back to the status quo, to things as normal, as usual. What are those 3 things? Go, Chris.
Well, one of the things that my wife talks a lot about to folks who are interested in these issues is beginning to follow, if you're on social media, if you're on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, to follow leading voices of color. You know, she's talked about to a lot of her friends, women of color. Where you're reading and where you're getting your information is key. That would be 1. 2, I think there are extraordinary leaders. I mean, I can tell you a whole host of them right now who are running for office all across the state of Florida, that are dynamic, that are extraordinary, but that don't have a lot of resources or support or people rallying around them. And so I think there's a responsibility. If we want to see things change, we got to put people in office who get it and who understand how to fix things. And so I think getting behind some of those people and validating them, because we all need it. All of us need it. And I think the third thing is really the heart, is really the heart thing. It's just allowing yourself to evolve and develop. I was watching this morning the John Legend Common song from last night, Glory, you know, and just sort of processing. And I got to meet Common ever so briefly on the campaign trail, and just processing what am I supposed to do in this story? And how can I be of service? And how can I humble myself so that I can elevate others? And I think that's really the genesis of living.
I like that, Chris, that P word, process. Thank you. Cecile, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Okay. I think in every community, there are activists that are doing things. They may not be famous, but I don't think it would take much work to find out what's going on. There's often a Black preacher or you know, a progressive person who is like doing grassroots. They're not the famous ones. They don't have a big blog or following. Just go where the action is and lend your support. You may be an artist and you can do a poster. You may, you know people with resources financially that can help them. But just go where the action is and see how you can participate. And secondly, when you get there, be respectful. Don't run to the front. I got your answer. I'm going to fix it. I'm here now. I'm so glad. You know, just be a worker, pick up the bag, carry it to the car, put on your mat, do what everybody else is doing. Be there, get to know people on a human level, because again, I see this happening frequently. When majority people finally get the aha, sometimes they're so excited and exuberant, they're like a dog with a tail knocking everything over. Just bring it on down. Be humble, be within yourself, observe. Again, people of color, we already speak 2 or 3 languages. You're in our world now. And I've had people say, you know, I never understood why this caused offense. I said, well, when you walked into the room, I was saying hello to everybody, but no one would talk to me. I said, well, they were working. You disrupted them. But the white person thought they were doing a great thing by hi. And this is like the annoying white person. It's like, they're all working. They're all doing their thing. Just sit in your seat, be quiet. And then when they take their break, you take the break. Learn the other culture. So that's number 2. And I guess the third thing, I think white people have this option. Speak up. Be willing to be unpopular. I think many times when I do my cases and in personal life, I see white people that know something wrong is happening, and they'll often come back to me. They'll come back to me and my husband, who happens to be Caucasian. So they come back and they'll say, I'm so glad you spoke up. I'm so glad you wrote that letter, but I'm afraid to. My business, my friends, you know, they have to have the strength of their convictions and whatever religious values they have, if it's Jewish or Muslim or Christian, that in all of those major religions, it's to be honest and to not with hatred, but to correct and to challenge those around you who maybe unintentionally or unaware are stepping on toes or showing an ism. So to be brave, those would be the 3 things.
I love those. I love all of those points. Chris, Cecile, thank you for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your truth, as we talk about a very difficult conversation, a difficult issue in our America that we hope will go away. And I appreciate the honor to be able to lead this conversation. Thank you to the Holocaust Museum for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. Rachel, I'll give it back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cecily.
Thank you.
Wow, just thank you so much, Cecile, Chris, and Cecily. It has been an absolute privilege to listen and to learn from you all, and to just be so thoroughly inspired and motivated by your knowledge and your energy to take action against racial inequity. We have a lot of work to do, and I know I'm really carrying with me right now Cecile's words, you know, be humble, observe, listen, slow it down, but take action and slow it down just to figure out the right action steps forward while we're listening to the activists that are stepping up always. And thank you to our audience for always being here, for you all for stepping up and writing and posing such thoughtful and meaningful questions in the chat. We're grateful for the time we had together, and of course, always just wish we had more time. I'm Serena Ahmed, program coordinator with the Holocaust Center, and here to close out our event with just a few words and announcements, so please bear with me. I first want you all to know that the recording of this event will be uploaded to our website within the next few hours. So please share with any of your family, friends, colleagues who missed this discussion so they can watch it at their convenience. And after today, you'll receive an email with a link to take a short survey where you can provide feedback. If you may please take a few moments to complete the survey, we greatly appreciate your feedback on how we can improve our time together in all future events, because we have a lot upcoming always. We have a number of incredibly empowering upcoming virtual community programs, and I really want to make sure that we highlight these today. I know we all had a lot more questions after this amazing event today, and so we will just have to look forward to these future events and experiences together. In the chat, Jill Cassinger had said the challenge is that we need to keep these conversations alive. And these types of programs are ways in which we at the Holocaust Center, we really ensure that these difficult conversations endure amongst the community. And we really think that these conversations, they set a foundation for us that we need in order to move forward together across ethnicities, religions, generations, to actually create a more equitable society. And so on August 30th, from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., we're hosting a conversation with Peter Gross, the town that saved thousands. And this is a part of our series called In My Own Words, where we hear directly from Holocaust survivors. On Thursday, August 27th at noon, we'll have a virtual screening and chat as a partnership with WUCF. Please join us for this virtual preview of the new PBS documentary, Harbor from the Holocaust. And our next Strategies for Action program will be on September 2nd. Our education director, Rachel Lucy Hitt, will be facilitating us through how we embark on these inner journeys that are the necessary steps towards real justice and liberation. This event is entitled The Inner Work of Bias and Oppression. I hope you all will be able to join us in this next session. I saw so many of us in the chat writing about how implicit bias must be addressed in our homes, workplaces, and communities. Lastly, thank you all so much also for your financial support to make sure that these programs keep going. You can text SFA to 91999 to donate, or click the links in our chat that Rachel is posting for us. And on behalf of the Holocaust Center, thank you all so much for being with us today. And I hope you all please stay safe and have a restful rest of your day and weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.